And I'd just like to quickly add to that. I think our history of investment has shown that while in that hypothetical, when you ask the question, would you be more likely, the answer is exactly what was stated. In fact, I think our history shows that we continue to invest here, even when, if you were going purely on the economics, it might not make sense to do so because we want to be successful in New York, and I'm not aware of anything that would drive a change in that thinking.
That's why we do want to, and I included my opening remarks with this, Mr. Chairman. That's why we really do want to work, and I'm sure my colleagues feel the same in our competing companies in the association. That's why we really do want to work with you. We are committed to the state, have been, are today, very proud of our investment in our employees, but it would go a long way if New York would catch up with the other 36 states that are ahead of the curve. We're behind the curve, and we need to catch up, and we do look forward to rolling up our sleeves and working with both of you to help the state do just that.
Frontier and cable telecom. You've been very quiet. I was chatting with someone from Frontier last week, indicated a great interest in the new New York Broadband Initiative, indicated possibility of maybe partaking. Maureen's testimony ended with some profound words. However, New York State should take care not to fund duplicative overbuild that will reduce the return on investment for the providers that are utilizing private capital to extend service throughout the state. I guess the question, obviously the question is for two of you. Would a company like Frontier consider moving into an area already served to compete? And secondly, was that just an offhand comment, Maureen, or is that a profound and sincere concern of your association based perhaps upon something that's missing in the broadband guidelines?
First of all, I think that the goal is to solve the immediate problem, which is universal service, and to make sure that everyone in the state has the availability of the services that they need, and to solve that problem first. But in terms of the program itself, it is very important that there isn't a perception that once folks have invested in the state, that government is going to come in and create more competitors than are perhaps needed in a particular area, and essentially erode the investment that the companies have made. I think your hypothetical was actually pretty profound. Your hypothetical about, if you have a high-cost state and you have a low-cost state.
That was my question to Verizon.
No, I understand, but
Okay.
I'm kind of making the same point. And that is that you have to have an environment for investment in New York, because this is not a static technology. It's not a static level of demand. It is a growing level of demand. It is an evolving technology. And companies that are national companies, or at least multi-state companies, have to make decisions about where they put their capital dollars. And it's not just whether it's a high-cost state or it's a low-cost state. It's the regulatory environment. It's all the other things that were alluded to earlier in terms of taxes and statutes and so forth. And they're going to have to allocate those dollars. Now, in the merger order, there are specific commitments, and the company has committed not only to, in the new charter company has committed not only to the 145,000 extensions, but they've also committed to going into the broadband program and bidding into that program and coordinating with the broadband office. And whatever projects it undertakes pursuant to those bids will be above and beyond the 145,000. So in other words, the 145,000 is a floor for the company. And if it does win some of these bids, it'll be making additional investments. But again, whether it's cable company or it's I don't want to speak for Verizon per se, but when you have a multi-state company, there are a series of factors that go into whether or not they invest in New York, and every single one of those does determine what will get allocated.
And do you feel that there are sufficient protections for
I
incumbent?
have not read, I can't speak to that at this point, Mr. Chairman. I have not read the full proposal. I'd be happy to provide comments when I have.
If I may, sometimes the issue of universal service butts heads with the concept of competition, and notwithstanding the remarks, the difficulty for policymakers is how to balance those sometimes competing issues, but still have a competitive market and not revert back to a monopoly market. So.
I would just say that we are very excited about the possibilities that the new New York broadband program offers consumers in New York in general, but especially those in our footprint. You asked specifically about whether we might bid for projects outside of our current service territory, and while I can't say that that's totally out of the question, generally we would focus on areas that are contiguous to where we serve, because that's where we have facilities, that's where we have employees, that's where we have reporting centers, and to go totally outside of that area means we'd have to replicate an entire new set of operations. So from a synergy standpoint and from a cost of service standpoint, it would have to be a very compelling case for us to propose that as an option.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to give you your chances in order of your requests. So, Ms. Rozek?
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. And thank you all for being here. You had talked, my questions are towards Verizon, pointed towards Verizon. You had talked about earlier your foresight, your commitment to customer needs. I want to ask you specific questions about the Lifeline program and the interplay between Verizon and the FCC and how you see your role in the program currently.
Oh, okay, thank you. We work closely with USAC. As you know, USAC is the FCC entity that's charged with managing the USF program, including Lifeline. We work closely with them in terms of handling the annual certification process. They're responsible for conducting the annual recertification process in New York. Based upon the information that they provide us, the regulations require that we adjust the Lifeline roles to reflect the results of their recertification process, and then we work with customers that believe that they're still eligible to either re-enroll or enroll for the first time going forward.
So let's talk about that for a little bit. Last year it was reported that 62,000 seniors, low-income seniors, were actually pushed out of the Lifeline program because of USAC taking on this new recertification. What was Verizon's response to that? I mean, 62% of Verizon Lifeline customers were pushed out of this program. What was the kind of reasoning that you were given from USAC, and then also what was the reaction from Verizon?
As I said before, there are federal regulations that govern the annual recertification. Customers are required to certify their continuing eligibility for the program. In connection with that, USAC sent notices to the customers, usually beginning in October, requesting that they provide certain information. You are correct that in 2014, at the end of 2014, there was a substantial reduction in the number of Lifeline customers in New York. In response, following that decertification of customers, and I'll note that a lot of the customers were decertified, probably the vast majority, because many customers failed to even respond to USAC's request at all. But having said that, we worked closely with those customers that felt that they were still eligible or had been de-enrolled. Verizon ramped up its staff so that we could process those applications and expedite the processing of those applications to get them re-enrolled. That did take some significant time because we did get a large increase in the volume of applications following that process. But we didn't stop there. We went back to USAC and worked with them to develop a better process for this year's certification process. And I'm happy to report that that process just finished in December. And this year, we actually had a 40% increase in terms of the number of customers and our ability to retain customers on the Lifeline program, with 80% of the customers that were on the program retaining the service and being recertified. In addition, as a result of our discussions with USAC, they increased their communication with the customers. And on the back end, where customers were decertified, one of the issues was that the customers had to get new applications so that they could apply. So Verizon had sent, at the time that we gave them the notice of decertification, Verizon also sent applications to the customers that were decertified to facilitate them re-enrolling if they felt they continued to be eligible.
So as a clarification, you think that the majority of people were pushed out of the Lifeline program because they just threw out their junk mail? They saw it as junk mail and then they just threw it out?
That may have been one of the problems with 2014's, the results of 2014. That may have been one of the reasons. Many customers did not respond at all, according to USAC. So that was a significant number. So obviously when they did respond and when they provided the required information by the regulations, they were promptly re-enrolled.
So I appreciate that, but I think what we're missing is that many of these notices and recertification applications, the customer service is not actually available in a customer's native language.
Just with respect to Verizon, we actually hire foreign language services so that we can communicate with the customers and to facilitate them completing the applications. So I understand that USAC may not have sent, to be clear, when I mentioned that as one of the reasons that it happened, I'm not suggesting that there weren't issues with USAC's process. That's precisely why Verizon went to them and worked with them. And I think the results of this year's certification show that our communications with them and the collaboration actually reaped benefits in terms of improving the process and making sure that the customers know that when the notice comes from USAC, that it does require attention.
I will tell you that we spend many hours in my office in particular talking to seniors who speak Mandarin or Korean or Cantonese and trying to go line by line and explaining to them the actual application. So does Verizon have notices in other languages, English and Spanish?
It's my understanding that we send annual notices regarding the certifications in multiple languages. The precise languages I could not tell you sitting here, but we're definitely sensitive to the issues you've raised, and we, as I said before, we do maintain access to foreign language. I know that a lot of the customers that we had were in areas that spoke primarily Russian, Chinese, and I know that we had the ability to access folks that could communicate in those languages to assist folks that were calling into Verizon to complete applications. With respect to USAC in particular sending notices, I don't believe they send, I believe they may send the notices in certain language, but I don't know the specific languages that they do.
Assemblywoman, just to add to what my colleague said and to answer the first question that you posed, which was what was our reaction, we were concerned. We were concerned because this was, again, this was a USAC is an entity that the FCC had been using, and then they assumed this responsibility in New York. We were concerned, and I know members of my team communicated with your offices and your office and frankly many other offices in areas across the state, particularly when it came to members that represented constituents where English wasn't their first language. So, answer to your first question, we were concerned. I can't even recount how many conversations either our colleagues at the state level and or at the federal level had with USAC when we said, you have got to improve this process. We made very specific recommendations. I actually, in answer to your question about the written communication, because I just personally want to know why this big change, I actually got a copy of the envelope that contained the initial communication. And frankly, I'll say this for myself, had I gotten an envelope like that, I probably would have tossed it, not knowing what it was. And so there were, USAC does a good job in many respects, but I think in 2014, some processes and procedures were lacking. We identified that right away, extensive, multiple conversations with USAC. As my colleague Keith mentioned, significant improvements made literally within a matter of months, and while the process is not perfect, it has been significantly improved from what it was before. While all this was happening, as USAC is modifying its procedures, as my colleague said, we deployed extra resources to really assist USAC and assist many offices in helping constituents get re-enrolled. The process has already been improved. We've seen, significant improvements year over year, and we expect those improvements to continue.
For lack of a better phrase, I'll put you on notice and say that it's still very much lacking in my community and in, I'm sure, many communities across the city. And if you are making changes to the recertification program and having additional resources for people who don't speak English as their first language.
Ms. Rocha, could you bring your microphone closer to you? So I think the public is having a hard time hearing you.
Turn it on. Usually just turns on by itself. You need to make that known and available to many.
That has been a focus of our conversations with USAC. This is a program that they, operate that any company that has a Lifeline customer would be engaging with, and so that has been our focus. Communicating with the FCC directly. I mean, the FCC obviously was concerned about this as well, and so they reached out to USAC, their contractor, to say, in effect, you need to make some significant improvements. And so we will continue to be engaged with your office and any other office, helping your individual customers, and to the extent you identify deficiencies that continue to exist with respect to the USAC process, we will work with USAC directly to make sure that they improve upon it.
Okay, and then last question. What's your position, as the City of New York alluded to earlier, what's your position on expanding Lifeline to broadband?
We haven't really, I can't say that we don't have a position on that particular issue at this time. We have not, to my knowledge, I think the short answer is we don't have a position. The FCC is taking a look at that issue. They're soliciting comments and thinking that through, and at some point, I believe they're going to make a decision with respect to that issue, and we'll comply with the requirements.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let me just explain to all of you here how we're going to continue proceeding. I want to thank all of you for your patience. It's been a long day, and we are not finished. All right, we're going to go to Ms. Walker and then Mr. Otis. I'm going to ask a few more questions of the companies other than Verizon and witnesses other than Verizon. Not a lot, but some. Okay, and then we're going to take about a 5-minute break. Then we'll go to the communication workers and then the panel of advocates.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Chairman Brennan and Chairman Scheminger, and to each and every one of you for being here today. I represent the communities of Brownsville and East New York, Bed-Stuy, Bushwick, Crown Heights, and Brooklyn. And for lack of a better term, we consider these neighborhoods to be in a broadband desert. And the thing that's the most disheartening is when one of my constituents who comes into the office all the time is a Verizon employee. And he talks about how he feels when he's laying fiber optic cables in places all over New York City, particularly in Manhattan. But when he comes home, there's a different scenario that he has to deal with. And while I appreciate Verizon and Cablevision and all the other companies for remaining here in New York State, what I'm concerned about is you remaining here, there's a certain semblance of equality and justice that you have to provide to the people who you are servicing, particularly since we pay the same amount of money for service than anyone else does across the city, definitely. But yet we receive a lot less in terms of the quality of the service. For instance, when it rains, my district office has no telephone service. Not just my district office, but also many of the medical providers in the neighborhood who depend on internet access and broadband for universal health care records access. So technically, when it rains or when we have some other type of bad weather, it shuts down not only government access to government services, but also to quality health care. So I'm concerned about, when is it that we're expecting to be able to have quality broadband access in our areas? Is there a particular timeline that we're looking at?
Well, if I may, Assemblywoman, and thank you for your question. I guess I want to first understand part of the comment when you mentioned the employee said there was a different scenario. I just wanted to make sure I
different
understood
scenario
what
is that
he or she
when
was
he's in
mentioning.
Manhattan, he's working and he's laying down these cables, but they don't exist. We don't have Fios. We don't have fiber optic. Most of what we're dealing with, and this is going from my own. I'm utilizing the facts that I have before me. And from what I understand, in many instances, we still have copper wires in Brownsville. And, we also have Cablevision. I understand someone is here from Cablevision. And I'm a Cablevision customer. But when I'm in my home, I can't utilize the optimum Wi-Fi. So I don't even know if that really does exist in Brownsville. And also, when it comes to even the services there, it's also questionable. So when I say in terms of the differences, the difference between someone who has to work hard to be able to provide quality service and access to broadband in other areas, but he's not even receiving those same quality of services in his own home when he has to use his hard-earned money in order to pay for the services that he expects, even in his own home, that he provides in other areas.
Well, I'll attempt to answer part of your question. Obviously, Cablevision should address, I think, anything related to Cablevision. But I think to your question, if you're asking about our deployment of Fios, if that's the question.
That's the question.
Okay, in your district, I am happy to, and myself personally, to sit down with you and show you a pretty detailed, I would say it's a proprietary map, but happy to share it with you so that you can see precisely where we are currently deployed in your district. Part of what I had mentioned earlier in response to the chairman's question had to do with our deployment of Fios in New York City. And one of the things I talked about was that we have passed all the premises, meaning going all down the avenues throughout the residential neighborhoods in the city. The next phase of our project, though, is getting into individual buildings. We clearly have buildings in your district where we're covered. That we obviously have not reached every customer who has requested our service. That's an ongoing challenge. When there are buildings where we can get into, we obviously have a vested interest to get to those customers as quickly as possible because we've invested $3.5 billion and counting in the city. We do have challenges, however, and would love to work with you and we have worked with some other members of this body as well as the state Senate, as well as members of the New York City Council, who have worked with us to reach out to groups of building owners who say, listen, you may have Cablevision in your building, you may not want to be bothered with getting Verizon in, but you've got tenants, and Verizon has prospective
Right.
customers that want to get into the building.
I-
I'm not saying
I
that's
beg
the
to
reason in every
differ.
instance, but those are challenges that we would love to work with you on moving forward.
Right, so from what I understand, that the cables came up Rockaway Avenue, right? And then they jumped over Brownsville and went and hit Bedford-Stuyvesant. So that entire community is basically, it was ignored. And I don't know, whatever the reasons were, it's just the circumstances that we exist in. And as you indicated, I would love to work closely with you in order to avoid us from having to experience that in the future. I also represent a large number of public housing developments. So I'd like to know perhaps a little bit about, do you have any projects that you're working on as it relates to wiring public housing? I always remember growing up and everyone else had HBO around me, but living in public housing, we didn't get that until I was almost an adult, I would say.
Well, I'm very happy you asked that question, Assemblywoman, because not only are we in NYCHA buildings, but actually the rate of our deployment to NYCHA buildings is higher than our rate of deployment on average to the rest of the city. Verizon, and frankly, NYCHA, to its credit, had a very strong working relationship going back to the very beginning of our franchise. We are not yet in every NYCHA building, but the rate of deployment actually was accelerated in many NYCHA buildings even before we really started deployment in non-NYCHA buildings. As a matter of fact, and the chair of the Public Service Commission wrote Verizon asking a series of questions to which I've responded, and I'll be glad to share that communication with you. And one of the things that Verizon talked about in response to the chair, and with a tremendous source of pride, is the significant investments that we make in NYCHA buildings are far above and beyond, in the tens of millions of dollars, that our franchise doesn't require us to do, but NYCHA has asked us to do for various reasons related to security. Our record is very strong there, and would be happy to share with great specificity precisely what we're doing in NYCHA buildings throughout the city and then specifically in your district.
So, thank you. So also I have another question as it relates to community centers, homeless shelters, senior centers. There are many different instances where I would go, particularly as recently as last week, to a senior center and who have these computers, but they don't have any access to the internet for whatever reasons, whether they can afford to pay for those services or not. And if we're trying to take particularly our young people into, to be able to catch up to everyone else in the 21st century, we have to do maybe a little bit more to be able to provide internet service and make that a reality for our young people, particularly because in neighborhoods like Brownsville and East New York, if you don't have a cell phone, you don't have internet. And, I was just looking the other day, today, I received a message saying that for another, gig of service, add $20. And I work every day, so I can afford to probably be able to do that. But for somebody who's 16, 15 years old, who want to, maybe check their Facebook accounts, they don't really have access to that. So I would like to perhaps know some of what you guys are doing as it relates to maybe some social services programs where you're providing broadband and internet access to young people, senior centers, homeless shelters, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure, I'm happy to take that question. Cablevision may
Is
want to.
Cablevision here? Someone told me
Yes,
that.
Ms. Walker, do you want Cablevision to come up and respond to some
Yes,
questions?
please.
Or not? Ms. Schroeder, thank you.
Hi.
With respect to your last question on community centers, I think a good example of the company's commitment is the fact that we provide 101 megabit service to every public library.
Ms. Would you introduce yourself for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Lee Schroeder. I'm Senior Vice President of Government Affairs and Public Affairs for Cablevision.
Go on.
So as I was saying, so one example of our commitment to the community is providing free 101 megabit per second service to every public library that we serve in Brooklyn and the Bronx, which is 75 libraries. So that's an example of the type.
Okay, well,
And Wi-Fi hotspots throughout the area that are available to any of our broadband customers at no additional cost on any device they have.
I would like for you to take a look, though, to see the quality of the, what do you call it? The broadband, the Wi-Fi,
broadband,
the
the
cloud.
Wi-Fi, optimum Wi-Fi
Right,
service?
the optimum Wi-Fi service, because it's not something that is operating well in this particular area at all.
Okay.
So if we can perhaps discuss this a little bit more offline.
Sure.
And to say that you are providing services to libraries, I think doesn't even touch the tip of the iceberg of providing access and quality access for all people, right? So, I mean, even if you could consider what you can do to go even further than, because if I can call all the libraries off the top of my head, there may be 4 libraries. And ultimately, like I was mentioning earlier, the lack of integrity of the quality of the service affects our health care. It affects access to government, and particularly, we're working on trying to do, even for elections. When people come to, when it comes to having elections in our district, Verizon, as I know, has to provide these sort of MiFi because we have just no internet access in our particular communities. So we have to do just a little bit more to be able to shore up the scenarios. Lastly, there's an industrial park in my district. It's the Pickens Avenue Industrial Park in East New York. And we're trying to encourage more people to come and to do business in the area from our economic development standpoints. And the one thing that they keep telling us is that the fact that we don't have a great integrity in our broadband services, that they don't want to locate there. So I just want to help you to understand some of the collateral effects of a quality of care of an entire group of people and neighborhood and community of people, and how that gets affected when we're not providing just quality services to them when they're expecting to have the same level of service as everyone else across the city and by extension across the state. So on behalf of all of the people that I represent, on behalf of that employee who comes into my office on a regular basis, I encourage you to consider the way that you are deploying your broadband and really, help us to do a better job with it in our community. And on behalf of Ms. Blanche Pelton-Bush in my district, as it relates to Cablevision, she would like more access to a variety of programming. She feels like she's paying every day and having to watch the same thing on TV. So again, thank you for your time and for your patience, and I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging.
Do you want to
May I just
respond
address
further?
another point? Because I would love the opportunity to sit down and talk with you, show you where our Wi-Fi hotspots are deployed specifically in the communities you serve. But overall, our service of up to 101 megabit per second broadband service is available throughout our service area, which includes, I believe, almost all of your districts. So I would love the opportunity to sit down and see where
It's one way to be able to answer that. Like,
okay.
You come out, you hook into it, and you see if you get service.
Yeah.
Or you see how fast it is, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe you do, but it's moving like, takes, 15 minutes in order to pull up and load, one page. And God forbid we are online, and having to help people to fill out forms. I mean, NYCHA is all online. Everything is an app. There's an app for that. There's an app for this. And we just don't have access to that world. So we don't even know what it means. And it even affects the opportunity for people to even have an email address. So it's a quality of life issue. And as much as it is a service issue, as much as it is an issue of antitrust or whatever, all the other serious issues that we're talking about here, I'm just talking about my next door neighbors. So thank you, and I look forward to talking with you a little bit further about it.
Sounds great.